Would you believe a dog could sense something hidden for over a decade? Buried behind a wooden shed wall, something no one, not even the boy's grandfather who built it, knew was there. All of it started because of a single terrifying moment in a quiet backyard when the sky filled with bees and a child screamed for help, but no one was close enough except for the German shepherd who had never left his side. Not even once. Not even when the boy was angry or silent or asleep. And if you're watching this right now, tell us in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there, because this story may just stay with you long after the video ends, and you'll see why in just a moment. Because once you hear what happened after that dog leaped over the garden bed and threw himself into the middle of the swarm, shielding a child with nothing but his body and heart, and once you learn what they found inside that shed, your idea of what a dog can do, what he can feel, might change forever. But to understand that, you need to start with the boy, and his name was Ethan, just 6 years old. The kind of kid who asked 100 questions before breakfast, who loved apple juice more than water, who once cried because he thought the moon was lonely when the sun came out, and his parents had separated the year before, which left Ethan spending a lot more time with his grandfather Joe, a retired firefighter who wore flannel shirts even in summer, and who spoke to Ethan not like a baby, but like a little man who deserved to understand the truth. And every Friday, Ethan's mom would drop him off at Grandpa Joe's small cottage on the edge of town, where the lawn was always freshly mowed, and a wooden shed stood at the corner of the yard like it had always been there, half forgotten. Its hinges rusted and the smell of old paint clinging to its walls, and it was behind this shed, just past the faded rose bushes and the toppled garden gnome, that the dog had first appeared 3 years earlier, during a storm so strong it knocked out power across the entire county. And Grandpa Joe had found the dog soaked and shivering under the porch, with no tags, no collar, just deep brown eyes that watched every movement like they were memorizing the world in case it changed again. And though Joe hadn't planned on keeping a dog, especially at his age, something about the way that Shepherd sat quietly beside him that night, tail still, ears lowered, convinced him to give it a try. And Ethan named him Diesel the following weekend, after the toy truck he'd lost in the sandpit and never found again. And from that moment, Diesel became part of the family, never leaving Ethan's side, walking him to the mailbox, curling beside his feet during story time, even pacing outside the bathroom door when the boy took a shower. Like some part of Diesel had chosen the boy and not the other way around, and no one questioned it, not even Grandpa Joe, who simply built a small ramp so Diesel wouldn't have to jump off the porch. And then came that hot August afternoon, the kind where the air feels heavy with silence and even the birds seem to vanish. And Ethan was playing in the backyard while Joe trimmed the hedge, the same as they did every Saturday, and Diesel was sprawled under the tree with one eye open, until something, a sound, a scent, no one really knows, made him stand up, alert and tense, as if his entire body had tuned into something no human could sense. And that's when it happened, so fast and yet so slow. Like time itself paused to witness it, as a loud crack echoed from the back of the shed and a black swirl burst into the air, bees, hundreds of them, maybe thousands, pouring from a crack in the wooden panel, disturbed by vibrations or heat, or maybe just fate, and Ethan didn't scream right away. He looked up in confusion first, then in fear, and then in agony. As the swarm closed in, stingers flashing like sparks, and Grandpa Joe dropped the hedge trimmer and ran, yelling, but the distance was too far. He would never make it in time, and it was Diesel silent. Knocking over a chair and barreling through the lawn, placing himself between the boy and the swarm, his fur instantly crawling. With bees, his eyes never blinking, his mouth clenched shut as if he understood that barking wouldn't help, only shielding, only staying still and strong while Ethan cried and curled beneath him, arms over his head, sobbing Grandpa again and again. But Grandpa wasn't the one saving him in that moment. It was Diesel, the same dog who never needed praise, who never chased balls or begged for treats, the one who just waited for moments like this. And Joe finally reached them, swatting bees, dragging Ethan away, lifting the boy into his arms while calling out for Diesel to come too. But the dog didn't move, not right away. He stood his ground, staring toward the shed as if something else had caught his attention. Something behind the wall where the bees had erupted. And that's when Joe noticed it too. The strange hum coming not from the swarm but from inside the shed, a low mechanical buzz that didn't belong to nature. And after rushing Ethan inside and calling an ambulance just to be safe, Joe returned with gloves and a hose, trying to disperse the last of the bees. And Diesel just sat there now, scratched, swollen, but alive, staring at that shed like he was waiting for permission to do something, and it was only later. Once the paramedics had assured them Ethan would be fine, once the panic had passed and Diesel's wounds had been cleaned, that Joe stood in front of the shed with his flashlight, looking at the warped wooden door and asking himself why the dog wouldn't leave that spot, why he'd returned 3 times since the attack to sniff the base of the far wall. Ears back, tail rigid, and that's where the story begins to twist into something no one could have predicted, because behind that wall, buried, bolted, forgotten, was something left behind nearly 12 years earlier. Something Joe never built and never knew was hidden there, and it was Diesel who uncovered it, not with bark or bite, but with stillness and focus. The kind of attention only a dog gives when the world needs to stop and listen. The shed had always been there, like background noise in a peaceful song. A part of the backyard that blended into the landscape so seamlessly that no one questioned its purpose anymore. Not even Grandpa Joe, who built it with his late brother. During a summer long gone, and while its walls had seen tools come and go, seasons pass and vines crawl up its siding, it had not once been opened in over a decade. The lock rusted shut, the hinges fused by time and neglect. And yet now, it sat different. Not just weathered, but wrong, like the dog knew something no one else could explain, because Diesel, still aching from the stings, paced slowly in front of it. Nose to the baseboard, circling back again and again, pausing now and then to glance at Joe, as if asking silently, "Do you feel it too?" And Joe, who had faced burning buildings, collapsing beams, and screaming chaos in his years as a firefighter, suddenly found his hand shaking as he lifted the flashlight, the beam trembling across the seams in the old wood, landing on something he hadn't seen before, a small hairline crack near the bottom corner, barely visible unless the light hit it just right, and Diesel saw it too, backing up once, then pawing gently at the ground. Not frantic, not destructive, just certain, and Joe whispered, "All right, boy. Show me," not knowing what he expected, maybe a nest, maybe a broken beam. But not what they'd actually discover. Because when he returned with a crowbar and forced the lock, the door groaned open like it had been holding in breath for years, the inside choked with dust and old cobwebs, the smell of earth and something faintly metallic creeping out like a ghost from memory. And Diesel stepped in first, tail lowered but moving, ears alert, and Joe followed, brushing aside old jackets and rusted tins until they found it in the UHL. In the back corner, behind a row of half-collapsed shelves. A false wall, thinner than the others, the kind used for insulation or secret compartments. And it was Diesel who put his paw against it, leaning his weight forward until the thin plywood cracked and gave way, revealing a small crawl space, just big enough for a child. And inside, wrapped in a blue fleece blanket with tiny clouds printed on it, was a box, taped shut and labeled with a name Joe hadn't spoken in 15 years. Danny, his brother's son, Joe's nephew, who had disappeared one summer day when he was just 10 years old, swallowed up by a mystery the town had never solved, and Joe's breath hitched as he pulled the box out. Every part of his body trembling, his eyes darting. To Diesel, who had now sat down calmly, watching him like his job was already done. And with trembling hands, Joe opened the box. Inside were photographs, hundreds of them, some old, some recent, some printed on cheap paper, others on old-school Polaroids, each one of a different child. Different places, all boys between the ages of 5 and 10, and a notebook, water-damaged, but still readable, the first page written in block letters that read, They never believed me. And Joe stepped back, heart pounding, throat dry, trying to process what he was looking at. When Diesel let out a low, barely audible growl, not of fear, but of warning, and turned his head toward the far wall, where the wooden planks didn't quite match the others, and Joe pressed his ear against it. Hearing it again, that soft mechanical hum like an old generator struggling to stay alive. Without thinking, he kicked at the base, the plank splintering under his boot to reveal a hidden metal container buried under loose soil. Container wired to a small blinking green light, and Joe staggered back, adrenaline rising as he realized this was more than a hidden stash. It was a setup, an old one, wired to something, maybe a camera, maybe a trigger. And his voice cracked as he whispered, "What the hell did we just find, Diesel?" And Diesel didn't answer, of course, but his body language shifted again. No longer on edge, but resolved, like he knew that now the boy was safe. Now the secret had surfaced. His job wasn't over, but it had changed, and Joe closed the shed door, locking it again from the outside, and calling the sheriff before he even called his daughter. Because this wasn't just family history now, this was evidence. And as the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the backyard, Ethan slept quietly inside with an ice pack on his arm, unaware of the storm his dog had just unearthed, and Diesel stung, tired and aching. Limped to the porch and laid down, head on his paws, eyes watching the shed, and for the first time in decades, Joe felt like there was something bigger than fate at work. Something divine, or ancient, or just simply canine, and he whispered, "Good boy." Not realizing yet that Diesel wasn't just good, he was about to uncover even more. Because this was only the beginning, and what came next would pull them into a story tied to more than just Ethan or Joe, or even Daniette, would link them to an old, unsolved case that had haunted the county for years. And Diesel, the quiet guardian, had just cracked it open, one paw at a time. The investigation started before the sun rose the next morning, long before the dew had even dried off the porch railings. Or Ethan had rubbed the sleep from his swollen eyes and asked why Grandpa looked so serious. The answer wasn't easy to give, because how do you explain to a 6-year-old boy that his dog, his quiet, loyal protector, had just uncovered something that the police couldn't find for years? Diesel's instincts had led them to a truth long buried beneath silence and rot. A truth that carried names and faces and questions no one wanted to ask. But still, Joe knew Ethan deserved something, so he knelt beside him, cupped the boy's cheek in his weathered hand, and said softly, "You've got a very smart dog, kiddo. Smarter than all of us." And Ethan, still groggy, looked over at Diesel, who lay at the edge of the rug, bandaged and groggy, but still alert, ears twitching at every sound, and reached out to hold his paw gently, whispering, "You saved me, didn't you?" And Diesel, in his way, offered a soft exhale and a blink so slow and calm it felt like a nod, like he understood every word and more. And outside, the backyard had become something of a crime scene, though Joe hated that word. Hated seeing the yellow tape stretched across the gate, the forensics team moving in and out of the shed, cameras flashing, officers murmuring over evidence tags. Because that shed had once held nothing more than shovels and grass seed, and now it was a doorway to pain, and it all came rushing back when Detective Andrea Mallory arrived. A sharp but kind woman with crow's feet in the corners of her eyes and a voice like worn velvet, the kind that's heard every excuse but still listens to every whisper. And she greeted Joe not like a suspect or a witness, but like a man who had unknowingly uncovered a ghost town beneath his garden. And when he showed her the box, the photos, the blinking metal device, she grew quiet, her fingers trembling slightly as she flipped through the notebook, and paused, running her finger along the top edge of a photo clipped to the back cover, her mouth slowly forming a name, Jace Miller, a boy reported missing 7 years ago from a neighboring county. His case gone cold after police lost the trail in a wooded park near a summer fairground. And Joe felt a chill crawl down his spine because he remembered the headlines, remembered thinking it was too close to home, and suddenly this wasn't just about Danny anymore. It wasn't just family, it was bigger, older, darker, in a way that didn't need ghosts or villains to be terrifying. Because real pain doesn't come in the shape of monsters, it comes from silence. From the things left unsaid, the questions unanswered, The faces no one remembered until a dog barked in the right direction, and as Detective Mallory made calls, connected threads, sent for FBI assistance, it became clear that the shed had been used at some point as a drop point, temporary holding place, and the journal written in a child's hand, but with chilling detail described being taken from a bus stop, fed peanut butter sandwiches, shown cartoons, and then left alone in the dark for hours until the voices stopped coming. And Joe had to sit down, had to close his eyes because he remembered Danny, remembered the way he used to laugh at bugs and cry when he lost a game. And now he could only picture that small face inside that shed, waiting for someone to come. And no one ever did except Diesel years later. Driven by instinct and loyalty to uncover what the rest of them missed, and when the media caught on, the street filled with vans and cameras. But Joe refused interviews, refused attention, because this wasn't about headlines. It was about Ethan, about protecting his grandson from knowing too much too soon, and Diesel became a quiet symbol of something good in a broken place. A hero whose reward was a gentle scratch behind the ears and a warm spot by the fireplace. And yet, even as days passed, Diesel wouldn't stop. He still returned to the shed, sniffing around the back where the grass grew uneven, where the earth sloped ever so slightly. And one evening, as the last of the officers packed up and the yellow tape was removed, Joe followed him, flashlight in hand, and Diesel paused, pawed at the ground, then looked up again with that same knowing gaze, and Joe sighed, got a spade, and began to dig. The soil dry but loose, and 6 inches down, they found another box, smaller this time, wrapped in an old towel, and inside, more photos, but these weren't of children. They were of people, adults, teenagers, even one of Joe himself standing in front of his mailbox. Suddenly the scope widened, the implications tangled, and it became clear this wasn't just about victims. It was surveillance, observation. Someone had been watching for years. And Diesel, with no training, no orders, had sensed it all, pieced it together in his own quiet language, and in that moment, Joe realized he'd never truly understood what Diesel was. Not just a dog, not just a protector, but a sentinel, the kind that appears in stories from the past, in legends of guardian spirits, except this one wagged his tail and limped on 3 legs, and as the moon rose over the yard and Ethan slept soundly inside, Joe whispered to Diesel, "You're not done yet, are you, boy?" And the dog's eyes glinted in the moonlight like embers, burning softly with purpose. And they both sat there a while, surrounded by silence, knowing that tomorrow would bring more questions, more truths, and that somewhere someone else might be waiting to be found not by sirens or men in suits, but by the nose of a dog who never needed to be asked to care. It was the kind of story that slowly crept across state lines, like a whisper passed from porch to porch, from nursing homes to schoolyards. Something people spoke about not because they understood it, but because they couldn't stop thinking about it. And by the time the 3rd week rolled around, the shed behind Grandpa Joe's home had gone from a forgotten garden structure to a symbol of what had been hidden for too long. And Diesel, the German shepherd who once slept unnoticed under the porch, had become a name spoken in classrooms, churches, and community centers. A dog with no medals or titles, just a battered coat, tired eyes, and a heart that had led him to the truth when no one else had the courage to look. And though the authorities continued their work, collecting evidence, cross-referencing names, and matching handwriting samples, it was Diesel who led them again. Not to another box or hidden door, but to a memory, buried not in wood or soil, but in people. Because in the weeks that followed, dozens of families came forward, not because they'd seen the news, but because they'd felt something stir inside them when they saw Diesel's face on screen, like a puzzle piece clicking into place. And one by one they started to speak. Women who remembered seeing a man with a clipboard at the park decades ago, now realizing he matched a sketch connected to the old case file. A retired school janitor who remembered strange noises behind the shed when Joe's brother used to host cookouts in the late 90s. And even a mailman who swore he saw a different boy looking out the shed's window one summer, but chalked it up to imagination, and it all unraveled slowly, painfully. like pulling thread from a sweater you didn't know was already fraying. And through it all, Diesel stayed close to Ethan, guarding the boy like nothing else mattered. But something had changed in Diesel too, something deeper. Because while he still nuzzled Ethan's hand and curled at the foot of the bed, there were moments quiet. Still moments when he would stare out the window, nose twitching gently, ears perked as if listening to something only he could hear. And Joe noticed, of course, because he noticed everything now, from the way Diesel limped. A little more after his nap, to how he lingered at the base of the oak tree, like he was waiting for a sign. And so Joe began to write not for the newspapers or the sheriff's office, but for Ethan, long letters tucked into a box labeled for later, letters that told the story of Diesel, not just the shed or the swarm or the strange discoveries, but the little things, the way he once nudged Ethan away from a broken step, or how he refused to eat unless Ethan was nearby, and how he would cry softly when the boy left for school, only to wag his tail wildly when he returned. And Joe wrote because he knew Diesel wouldn't be around forever. None of them would. But the story would stay, and it needed to be remembered. Right. Not with headlines or viral videos, but with the love that came from being seen and heard and trusted, the way only a dog can love. And then, one Sunday afternoon, the mayor called, asked if Diesel could be honored at the town square. A small ceremony with kids and families and perhaps a plaque by the community garden. And Joe wasn't sure at first, but Ethan's eyes lit up in a way Joe hadn't seen in months. And so they went, and Diesel, brushed and bandaged, wore a red scarf around his neck, and sat patiently while the crowd gathered. And when they called his name, he didn't bark or react. He just turned slowly to Ethan, then to the crowd, and lay down, placing his head gently on his paws as if to say, "It's okay now." And the applause that followed wasn't loud or wild. It was soft, respectful, the kind of clapping that comes from people who know something sacred has just happened. And after the ceremony, people approached, children, veterans, mothers each sharing their own story of a dog who once changed their life. Something beautiful began to grow there. Not a memorial, but a movement, a reminder to pay closer attention, to trust the intuition of those who love without needing a reason. And the sheriff, who had once doubted the need for a full investigation, placed his hand on Joe's shoulder and said, "We should have listened to him sooner." And Joe, watching Diesel nap under the bench, just nodded and replied, "We still can." Because the truth is, Diesel wasn't just a one-time hero. He was a messenger, a living reminder that healing doesn't come in sirens or suits. It comes in fur, in warmth, in stillness, in the quiet. Moments when someone chooses to stay, even when no one asked them to, and that night back at home. Ethan whispered something into Diesel's ear that only he could hear. Something that made the dog's tail twitch once, then twice, and in that moment, under the flicker of the porch light, with the breeze whispering through the leaves and the stars hanging low, Joe swore he saw something settle in Diesel's eyes. Something peaceful, like a weight lifted. And maybe it was because the town had begun to change. It started building a memorial park with open spaces for dogs and children. Or maybe it was because letters were arriving from across the country, people sending callers, drawings, even treats with thank you notes. But whatever it was, Diesel knew, deep in his bones, that the story was bigger than the shed, or the bees, or even the child he saved, and that sometimes the greatest heroes don't speak at all. They simply show up, stay close, and never let go. There are some endings that don't feel like endings at all, more like soft beginnings. Like when a season changes quietly in the night, and you wake up to find the air smells sweeter, or the light in your house falls just a little differently. And that's exactly how it felt in the months that followed. Not just for Joe and Ethan, but for the entire town. Because what Diesel had done, what he had uncovered, protected, remembered, was no longer just an event. It had become a thread sewn through the hearts of everyone who had watched that shed door creak open, who had seen that boy crumpled in the grass under a swarm of bees and a wall of fur and loyalty, who had read the notebook filled with truths, long hidden, and seen the dog's eyes staring calmly at something no one else could see. And in those weeks after the storm passed, things began to change in small but lasting ways. People built fences with extra gates so dogs could run freely with children. More shelters were visited. More dogs were adopted, not because they were perfect, but because someone had finally reminded the world what it meant to be chosen. And Diesel, well, Diesel remained the same in all the ways that mattered. But Joe could tell something was shifting, not just in his body, though the limp was deeper now. The naps longer, the dreams heavier, but in his spirit too, like a weight had been lifted. A mission completed, and every evening he would lie on the porch beside Ethan, nose twitching softly, eyes drifting closed as the boy leaned into his side and read books out loud, as if he knew that the voice of the child he saved was the sound he wanted to carry with him always. And Joe, who had never been one for prayers, began to speak them anyway, quiet words whispered into the stillness, asking only that Diesel be given comfort and rest and the kind of peace that only a dog with a full heart deserves. And then, on a morning in early spring, when the sky was soft with golden light and the breeze carried the scent of new grass, Diesel didn't get up, not at first, and Ethan, now 7 and reading chapter books, came down with his blanket and curled beside him, his little hand stroking Diesel's ear, until finally the old dog lifted his head, blinked slowly, and let out a sigh so deep it felt like it had been waiting for years to leave his chest, and then he nuzzled the boy once, just once, and closed his eyes again. And Joe, watching from the window, knew, and that day the entire town came together, not with sorrow, but with something gentler, something sweeter. They built a small bench beneath the oak tree where Diesel used to watch the yard, carved with the words "He stayed until we were safe." And people brought flowers and cards and pictures. And Ethan brought his favorite drawing of Diesel wearing a cape, because to him, that's exactly what he had been. And life, as it does, moved forward, the grass grew, the shed was taken down and replaced with a community garden. But one part of the floor was preserved and placed inside a glass case at the town museum, along with Diesel's red scarf and a copy of the journal he helped unearth. And Ethan, now older, tells the story every year at the library, not from memory, but from love, reminding each listener that dogs don't need to speak our language to hear what we cannot say. And Joe, now walking slower, still sits on the porch with a new pup at his feet, a rescue that Ethan named Echo because she always seems to find the exact spot Diesel used to lie in. And sometimes she'll pause and look at the tree, tilt her head, and wag her tail softly, like she knows. And maybe she does, because Diesel was more than a dog. He was a bridge, a protector, a keeper of secrets and souls. And somewhere out there in the quiet that lives between heartbeats and wind through leaves, he's still watching, still listening, still waiting for the next whisper of trouble, the next heartbeat that needs saving, because some heroes don't need endings. They just need to be remembered. And now, if you're still watching this, and you've ever had a dog who changed your life in even the smallest way, we want to hear your story. Drop it in the comments and tell us where you're watching from and what time is it there right now. Because maybe tonight, someone else will read what you write and feel a little less alone, a little more seen. And if you're lucky enough to have a dog lying nearby, reach out and hold them, not because they saved a life, but because they choose to love you every single day. And sometimes that alone changes everything.